بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. Today's clip is the third of the clips on the biographies of the Imams of the Qur'an. In the first one we mentioned particularly about an example from the blessed companion Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan and that unique relationship he had with the Qur'an, which was so common amongst the companions. In the second, we spoke about the different transmissions of the Qur'an as it was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ. These different transmissions now appear in the generation of the Imams of the Qur'an, who are from the generation of the Tabi'een onwards, the second generation onwards. And as we mentioned something about these blessed Ahlullah, the people of Allah, who are the Imams of the Qur'an, we should understand that we have 7 agreed qari, reciters of the Qur'an. And each reciter of the Qur'an has 2 transmitters who transmit slight variations from the Imam going back to the Prophet ﷺ. Imam number 1 of the Qur'an amongst the 7 Imams of the Qur'an, his name is Nāf'i ibn Raḥmān. Nāf'i. He was the Imam of Medina, born around the year 70 after Hijrah. So he's in a generation in Medina where there's still large numbers of companions of the Prophet ﷺ who are still present. Nāf'i, his reading of the Qur'an that's been transmitted from that time going back to the Prophet ﷺ, his reading is still recited in much of Africa, in North Africa, in West Africa, as we'll mention shortly. But particularly about Nāf'i. Nāf'i, he was in Al-Madinah Al-Munawwara, in Masjid al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the same time as Malik. Al-Imam Malik teaching hadith and fiqh and law in the Masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and at the same time in other parts of the Masjid, Nāf'i is teaching Qur'an. What a blessed combination that we have there. The great Imam of hadith and of law, Malik, and the great Imam of Qur'an, Nāf'i, teaching. Nāf'i, he taught Qur'an in the Masjid of the Prophet ﷺ for 70 years. For 70 years, he was blessed and honored to teach the Qur'an, such that Malik said about Nāf'i, he said, قراءة أهل المدينة sunnah. The reading of the people of Medina is sunnah. Malik had a particular preference for the reading of Nāf'i. An amazing miracle of Nāf'i. Whenever he used to recite the Qur'an, and even more than whenever he used to speak, when he opened his mouth, you could smell perfume coming out of his mouth. So he was asked a question: when you come to sit down and teach people, do you put on perfume every time to teach people? He said, I never touch perfume. I don't even come near it. But he said, I saw in a dream that the Prophet ﷺ was reading the Qur'an into my mouth directly. He said, the Prophet ﷺ was reading Qur'an into my mouth. He said, from that time, he said, when I woke up, always the smell of perfume is there. And in the qasida that everybody knows, وَكَفُّ الْمُصْطَفَى كَالْوَرْدِ نَادِي. وَكَفُّ الْمُصْطَفَى كَالْوَرْدِ نَادِي. The hand of Al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wasallam is like a beautiful rose. وَعِطْرُهَا يَبْقَى إِذَا مَسَّتْ أَيَادِي. And the perfume remains when hands touch him. When the Prophet ﷺ moved in the midst of their companions, they could smell the perfume Prophet ﷺ from far. And that reality appeared in the dream of Nāf'i, such that when he wakes up, perfume remains on his mouth. But more than that, even though that's karama ahl al-Qur'an, that's a miracle of the people of the Qur'an, and Allah honored him with that because of the Qur'an. He had the most handsome of all faces, the most beautiful and handsome of all faces. So somebody said to him, your face is so beautiful and your character is so amazing. How did he answer? He said, why wouldn't it be that way? when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to me in a dream and shook my hand, and I read the Qur'an to him in a dream. That was Nāf'i, the great Imam of Qur'an of Mecca that Allah subhanahu honored with these miracles, because 60 years he taught Qur'an in the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. On his deathbed, with his children around him, his sons around him, they asked him, give us some advice. He said to them, fear Allah, always make sure your relationships are good, obey Allah and His believer, obey Allah and His messenger if you are true believers. Nāf'i used to tell people when he's teaching Qur'an, he said, this Qur'an is great. It came from the Great One, so when you read it, don't busy yourself with anything other than the Qur'an, and look at who you're speaking to. So beware of ever getting bored of reading the Qur'an. That's the great Imam Nāf'i, the great Imam of Al-Madinah Al-Munawwarah, who served the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such that in many parts of the world, his reading the Qur'an is still read. Nāf'i had two main students. The first of them, his name is Qalun. Qalun. Or perhaps that's more his title. His name was Isa ibn Mina, but he's commonly known as Qalun. And Qalun spent years and years, 10, 20 years. 20 years he spent reading Qur'an to Nāf'i. But what's so amazing about Qalun, and this is again an example of a miracle of Ahl al-Qur'an, of the people of the Qur'an. What's so amazing about Qalun? Nāf'i would teach him to the point he said, how long are you going to read with me? 20 years. So he told him, go and sit in that corner of the masjid, I'll send students to you. But what's so amazing about Qalun, and it's unbelievable, except for these are people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Qalun was completely deaf. He could not hear a sound. If you blew a trumpet next to his ear, he couldn't hear a sound, except when somebody came to read Qur'an to him. When somebody came to read Qur'an as a miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you'll be able to know exactly where he made a mistake and correct him, even though he can't hear normal speech. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored Qalun, that even though he's deaf, he could hear and correct people reciting Qur'an. The second of the two transmitters of the Qur'an from Nāf'i, the two transmitters, is known as Warsh. Uthman ibn Sa'id, he's known as Warsh. And Warsh, he was from Egypt. He came to Medina. He spent a month in Madinah Al-Munawwarah, read the Qur'an 4 times, the whole of Qur'an 4 times to Nāf'i, went back to Egypt and spread the Qur'an in Egypt, and perhaps, Allahu A'lam, that special connection that Egypt and its people have with the Qur'an perhaps can be traced back to the great Imam of Qur'an, the students of Nāf'i, Warsh. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.